Can you tell us about your experiences in time growing up in Austria, what it was like, and specifically some of the stories that we've talked about?
Memories. Yeah, I have memories actually from the time I was a small child. Um, One of my most vivid memories, actually, I was talking to Papa the other day about this, was it was probably about 4, and we had a sort of a nanny, housekeeper, whatever, who did not like me very much. And I remember the low-flying the planes were coming in, and I remember she grabbed my little brother, who she loved, and left me sitting in the living room. And she took this 1-year-old and raced to the basement to hide. And I remember vividly still remember thinking, this is exciting. I think I need to go outside and see what is, and walking outside and walking from our house to a field that was nearby and watching the low-flying planes coming in and actually seeing the pilot. This is how low they were. And I also remember then when my mother had not been home, when she came home after all was clear, she was quite upset that I was outside and everybody else was in a bomb shelter. But I was outside. Another really vivid memory, and I can still see, is my parents listening to BBC. There was a German language BBC news station, which you could only get, of course, on a shortwave radio. And my father, being leader of the underground in the area of Austria where I'm from, he and his cohorts, his friends that were a part of that organization, sitting in the middle of the kitchen. They normally congregated in the middle of the kitchen in jail, and they had blankets like that, half a dozen blankets over their heads, listening to BBC, because you could not ever trust anyone that might be walking by and could possibly hear this, and they could possibly then, not possibly, but most likely would go to the Nazis and say, oh, Mr. Hollinger is listening to BBC. So that was one of the things that I remember vividly. One of the things that is really puzzling now that I had children and grandchildren of my own who were very open, told everything about their families and what was going on in the house, I don't ever recall anyone saying to me or to my siblings, don't talk about this outside the home. I think it was just a time that everything was so secretive that you just never ever talked about it. And I think this has kind of carried over with me, that if anyone tells me anything, and if they would say to me, this is just between us, I would never in a million years tell anybody about it, even my spouse. I wouldn't, and he can attest to this. The other thing that was happening in our house was that my father's group, one of their missions is to get to the British, and it was mostly British pilots that tried to bomb the army camp, and they were shot down because they would come over those big mountains and the German flak was right there and shot them down. Well, they had people stationed all around the mountains. And they would get to those pilots before the Germans could ever get there, because they knew their mountains.
Right.
They had hiding places. That hiding places all over the mountains that only they knew about it. And then at nighttime or whenever they felt it was safe, they would bring them down, and then they would hide them in different places. One of the places was our house. And there's a big center chimney in the house, big room actually around the chimney at the very top, and that's where they stayed until they felt they could be passed on. And I'm sad to say I don't know how many ever made it to Switzerland. If they made it, because once they were passed on to the next group, there was no way that anybody ever really knew what was actually happening to them. But kind of a funny story, one of my cousins, much older, who had been drafted female, because they also drafted females, and on the way, she had been home on leave, and on the way back to her duty station I think she was stationed in Berlin, she got off the train and came to my parents' house, and she was hidden in my parents' house until the end of the war. And it was my mother's older sister's daughter. And she was missing in action because the train had been bombed and they didn't know if she was on that train. And my mother could not let her sister know that her daughter was safe in our house. And the stories were, and I don't remember that personally, I don't remember, but they would dress her up as a male, and she would go downtown. I mean, the whole town there was a big army camp, and she would go to the movies dressed like a guy, sitting right next to German soldiers.
Wow.
I mean, she was gutsy. She was gutsy. But when they came, and then the SS regularly actually came and checked out my parents' house because my dad was suspected, she would hide up around the chimney. Sometimes there were pilots there, sometimes there were not. She was the only one hiding up there. But she was there, I believe, from 1943 to 1946, so she was there a long time. Yeah, I don't remember myself, because there were people in and out of our house all the time. My parents' house was the kind of house where people sort of congregated.
And did you know why these people were coming in and what your parents were doing with them?
Well, there was a suspicion because my father would not join the Nazi Party. So from that moment on, you were already suspect.
Right.
And it was very much assumed that he had something to do with the underground, but nothing could be proven. Those people were, very so secretive, and they were so tight, including his sister and her husband were part of that, which was Claudia's grandparents were part of that group also, of the underground. And they just had, my father's family lived in the same area for many generations. So he was pretty well known, and his family was pretty well known. And people respected him. So he was able to recruit a really good group.
So
Yeah.
what would the consequences have been if your
Concentration
father had
camp.
been, and why do you think it was important enough to them to risk it? Like,
Well, my father, I think from the very beginning, knew what Hitler, well, he didn't know that was going to be the Holocaust, but he knew that this man was all rhetoric, and that rhetoric is what captured the people and the time, the economic, and it's really was all about economics. I mean, people were starving, people were without jobs, and Hitler promised and provided, to a certain extent, those jobs. And, to the average person, that is what it's all about, is feed your family. It's, unfortunately, that is a reality. It's, they could not see beyond, and my father would talk to some of those people, but why do you think he is building those weapon factories, and why do you think he's building those roads, and why do you think they didn't, that was not on their radar screen. I think to look beyond the very obvious it was really pretty much beyond the common man. As most people were not, I don't know, sophisticated is probably not a good word, but it's they just really could not see beyond that, beyond just the economics and what it was doing to their own family. And,
Would your dad talk to you guys about it?
I grew up in a very political family. Our dinner conversation was always politics. Always politics. And to my father's credit, we were allowed to have our own opinions. He would debate you until midnight. But we were pretty much brought up that we should be thinking for ourselves.
So even at the young age that you
At
were.
a very young age.
Yeah.
Think for yourself. And that, that even went as far as religion. Non-religious house. In fact, my father had many feuds with the Catholic Church. But he felt that religion was part of education, and you needed to have that part of your education. And in order to make an informed decision, you need to know something about religion. But we were also told, you are the one that's going to decide and make an informed decision about it. And he felt this way about politics too, Stay informed and then make your decisions.
so how do you, because basically, like, all of your lives were at risk by doing this, right?
Yes.
So how, or did he ever explain to you why, like, his strength of conviction was such that he decided to, like, risk that?
I had a conversation with him when I was an adult and married and had children of my own. What would you have done? And he told me that he had a plan. He was never going to let us go to the concentration camp. I hate to say this, but he had a plan of killing everybody, including himself. He was not going to let us go to the concentration camp because one of his friends he did go to a concentration camp with his children, and they tortured his 4-year-old to get information. And actually, that man's other son and I became friends when we were teenagers. And obviously had many conversations about this. His father survived. His brother didn't. But he was never the same, and he was, it was horrible. It was,
But
yeah.
But did he believe so strongly this was the right
Yes.
thing?
Yes, he had, convictions.
What about your mom?
She felt the same. And interestingly, both of them came from families that felt the same also. They both came from families that had very, very strong convictions and political leanings. Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
And what's your dad's name?
Franz Hollinger.
And how old was he when he passed away?
He was 87.
87, wow.
He was 87.
And was he in Austria or?
He was in Austria, and he would never ever leave Austria. He was, I think of my father as a true patriot. And Kelsey knows our family's feeling about the von Trapp families, who, as far as my family was concerned, they were not really true patriots, because you do not leave your country. You don't abandon. You do what you can. You stay. You don't run. So.
And do you think that's why your mother and father and everyone risked everything? Was it for their country and just for
Yes. Yes.
what's right?
Yes. And I know that there are some people in my family that felt that may have been a selfish thing to do, because you were risking your family's lives. And but personally, I admire what my father was able to do, and my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was right there with him.
And what town are you from in Austria?
The town is named Admont, and comes from the Latin Alto Monte, big mountain. It's a beautiful picture postcard Austria. I also remember, and I remember that very well, after the war ended, because my hometown was actually split in two and was occupied. One half was Russian and the other half was American. And there's a bridge over the river Enns, and the middle of the bridge was the border. So the area of town that I lived in was the Russian zone, and then the other side was the American zone. Well, there are kind of funny stories about the Russians coming in, actually. The first groups that came in were fairly unsophisticated and uneducated. So they decided they're going to headquarter in one of the hotels. The big hotels were all in my part of town. So even though the Americans were across the bridge, they also had their headquarters in my part of town. So the Russian come into the hotel, and walking around all of the rooms, they had not seen indoor plumbing. So in those days, the bathrooms, they had those pull chains. You're far too young to remember this, but maybe your grandparents would. So they were obviously curious, and they were pulling in those chains, and the water started rushing through, and it was very noisy. And they thought that they were being attacked by the toilets. So they took their machine guns, and they didn't ever tell you this story, because they absolutely destroyed every bathroom in the hotel because they thought it was some German weapon that had been left behind.
That's funny.
That was
Horrible.
one of the funny stories.
Oh,
Yeah, so my sister got married at 17 and had a child, and she married a displaced person. He was survivor, the only sibling survivor of a large Polish Jewish family. The reason he survived was because as the Germans were coming east, some of the families took their oldest sons and sent them, if they had family, further east to get away from the advancing German troops. Well, what they didn't know was that the Russians were coming the other direction. So a lot of those people that were trying to get away from the Germans were then scooped up by the Russians and taken to Siberia, and that's where Alex ended up actually. So, and he was with a cousin initially. His cousin ended up dying in Siberia. He has an incredible story of survival, and I think Renee at some point, my niece, is going to write a book about it.
Wow.
Yeah, he survived, and he escaped, and then he was taken prisoners again and back to. At one point he was blind from malnutrition, and it was just. Then at one point he was hidden by a Christian family somewhere in Russia. It was just.
And he was young, right?
Excuse me?
He was young?
He was young.
Yeah.
Yes, he was like 17, 18,
Yeah.
19. So when the war was over, they kind of scooped everybody up that was kind of wandering around Europe, and put them on cattle cars and took them back to where originally they were from. And when he got to the town that he was from, he found out that his whole family had been taken to the concentration camp. But someone thought that his father may still be alive somewhere. So then he went in search of his father and found him in a camp in Austria.
Wow.
But his mother and 6 siblings and grandparents and aunts and uncles and everybody was gone.
How did his father survive?
His father had a skill. He was I guess you would say a tinsmith. He knew how to do roofing, and he knew plumbing, and he had a skill that the Germans needed.
Right.
And so he was kept alive, just barely, but he was kept alive.
So then your sister met
So
him
then
after
they
that.
met, and they married, and he had family that had come to the United States prior to World War I, actually. So
Ah.
they've been here a long time. So my sister and her husband then decided that, what happened once could happen again, and there was a lot of pressure from his family here to come to the U.S., and they came to the U.S.
And then you joined your sister years after, or?
Many years after.
Many years,
Yes,
wow.
yes. Mine was a very different life than hers.
Right.
You mentioned that the United States is your home.
Yes.
You feel like this is where...
Absolutely.
Yes. What do you think of Austria?
What I think of Austria, it's a wonderful place to visit. When my parents were alive, I would go visit at least once a year, many times twice a year. Now it's a place that I visit, and there is a part of me that feels an affinity, of course, but every single time I go there, this is not home. This is a place that I visit, and I can't wait to come home. I've always wanted to, actually, to be perfectly honest, I always wanted to be someplace else. I couldn't imagine living in one place forever. I think maybe I have a bit of a restless spirit. I am a restless spirit. I always want to see other places. I always want to go other places, and having led a military life, I never once resented a move. I enjoyed all the moves. Certainly enjoyed, most of all, enjoyed all of the different people that I've met. I've met some of the most incredible people in my life. Just briefly about being a Navy wife, and our husbands were gone a lot, and we become each other's family. Almost a little bit better than family, because we have no baggage. We have no baggage. We just there for one another. And those are still friends. 50 years later, they're still our friends. We see them. They're part of our life, and always have been. So.
How did you come to the United States?
I came because I had a sister that lived here and an older brother, and I was just going to come for a year. And then I came for another year, and then for another, and I would go back. And kind of promised my parents I would stay, and I didn't. But really, I think just before my father died, he and I had an incredible week before he died, talking about everything. And he admitted that I would have been off somewhere. If it wasn't the United, I would have been off somewhere. I would have never stayed in one place. But then once I got married, then this became my home. And
what do you, like, what words do you live by? Like, what do you think you live your life by? Like, what's important to you? How have your experience shaped what's important to you?
I think my most important thing is family. Family is probably means the most important is about the most important to me. Being honest with yourself and other people. And be who you are. Be who you are. Don't try to to be something that you're not. Just stand up for your beliefs. Stand up for what you believe. I believe in my family. I love you all.
Oh, stop.